Du is Use, Dart Mitten. Okay, so today's broadcast is sponsored by the Balta family, Lil Nishmas, Harav Avram Echol, Ben Yerbiakiv Shimon Halevi Flint, Olav Shalom, who was nifter a couple of days ago. And Rabbi Flint would have greatly approved, encouraged, and appreciated and applauded the retransmission, rebroadcast, and positive uses of this telecast. And his neshama should have an aliya.
That sounds very much like Akiva.
Yeah, surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And today's also the yurtat of a couple of prominent people, many prominent people. Some of them I know, some I don't. For the Shiva of Chevron, Meir Chodesh. But the interesting, it was Shua Leib Diskin's yurtzeit who fought to maintain the integrity of Torah and Jewish education in Yerushalayim. But very interesting, there's a Rabitza Kaduri who was nifter not too long ago. He was a Makubal who lived in Eretz Yisrael. He was nifter in 2006. And he was known as the Ziknei HaMukubalim. He was born in Baghdad in 1898. And he moved to Eretz Yisrael, I think in 1923. And his real name was Diva. He changed his name to Kaduri. But what's very interesting about him is very interesting. Graced with a phenomenal memory, I think you can see it on the screen. Graced with phenomenal memory, he was said to have known the entire Talmud Babel by heart. His closest students say that the bracha of the Ben Ish Chai, because he got a bracha from the Ben Ish Chai, and he got a bracha of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they give him a bracha that he would be zoichet to see Mashiach. And his Talmidim say it came true, because Rav Kaduri told them that he met Mashiach on Tes Cheshvan, 5764, so I'm not sure which year that is, 2003. And he said that Mashiach is not promoting himself, and that if you study my words in recent months, it would even give you a hint of who he was. So Rav Kaduri was 108 when he was nifter in 2006, and he claims that he saw Mashiach. So Mashiach must have for sure been born by 2006, which would make him a minimum of 14 or 15 years old today, maybe even older. Did anybody hear of Rav Kaduri?
It says 2003, no? 2003.
And 2003 is when he said he saw Mashiach. He was nifter in 2006.
Oh, okay.
November 4th, 2003, he claimed he met Mashiach on that day. So, he doesn't keep a presidential calendar where we can go back and see who he met that day. But I never heard this before, that he actually met Mashiach. Who knows? He also says that Mashiach is not into self-promotion. He's a humble fellow.
If Rabbi Akiva could be wrong about Mashiach, who Mashiach was, then who can we trust?
Well, it doesn't mean. I think what it means.
Over the centuries, hundreds
Mashiach.
of people predicted who.
Yeah, if the door would have been Royu, it could have been.
That's always the case.
Yeah, but
you always
that's
need
true. But
that.
if the door is Royu,
in case he doesn't come, you can say the guy.
But he was saying is if the door was Royu, I met the guy who it would have been.
Oh, so there's always a guy.
It's not going to be the same Mashiach, because if there is a Mashiach in the waiting and the door's not Royu, he's not going to live forever, right? Maybe the Lubavitcher Rebbe was Mashiach, but our door wasn't Zoicha, so it's on to the next. Maybe he got
story.
His
The old story. We're not Zeicha. We're never Zeicha.
It's a little depressing. No, we're always like we just missed the grade.
That's right.
We should just make the grade. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. So yesterday we learned about a story on Daf Nun Beis Hamad Beis about Rabbi Loi, who on the Shemitah year he cut a tree down that had some little immature fruits on them. And the Gemara challenged, you're not allowed to damage a Shemitah tree. It's la'achla v'loy lahefsid. And the Gemara ended up saying that whether or not that little thing, so the Gemara said, since there's no pears on the tree, he was allowed to cut it down. Correct, Gemara, what do you mean there's no pears on the tree? There were these little unripened, undeveloped dates on it. So the Gemara said there's a machlokes between a Yosy and the Rabbanon if those little dates are considered peiros. Rabbi Yosy holds they are. The Rabbanon hold there's not. Rabbi Loy held like the Rabbanon that those little dates were not considered peiros. And if they weren't considered peiros, he was allowed to cut it down. Yesterday, I think David Dayan asks, what about the problem of cutting down a fruit tree? Forget Shvius, forget Shemitah, it's a fruit tree. So the Rishonim speak about it, and they offer different terutzim. One teretz offered is that if it doesn't produce a lot of pears, it doesn't produce good pears, there they would be allowed to cut it down. Another opinion offered was that if the wood of the tree is more valuable than the pears, you're allowed to cut it down. And there's other shitas who learn that it's speaking where he didn't cut the whole tree down, he just cut a branch down. Although from Rashi, it's mashma that he cut the entire tree down. Because Rashi says, dekel tonkafnios. The kotatz hadekel eitzim. It doesn't say that he cut part of the dekel, cut the whole dekel. But other Rishonim could argue. Okay, so let's see the Gemara fighter. Maskav lo Rab Simi minardo. You're saving Rabbi Loy by claiming that the Rabbanon argue on Rabbi Yosy, and they hold that these little dates are not considered peiros. In fact, the Gemara, Umi pligi Rabbanon ale Rabbi Yosy b'shari lavis. Now, Rabbi Loy was referring to a date tree. The machloikis that the Gemara quoted between Rabbanon and Rabbi Yosy are by grapes, because the Mishnah that we quoted was Rabbi Yosy smader also. Smader are grapes in the very early stages of development, and he held even though grapes are in the very early stages of development, also if they peri upligi Rabbanon. So the Gemara wanted to say the same machloikis that they have by grapes would also be relevant by dates. And therefore, the Rabbanon by dates would hold that they're not considered peiros. By other trees other than grapes, I'm going to prove to you that the Rabbanon indeed hold that they're also called peiros. And if that's the case, Rabbi Loy would not have had the permission, the right to cut down that tree. But now we learned. At what point in the development of the trees, at what point do we say they are considered fruit laden, and therefore you're no longer allowed to cut them down? All trees, here Rashi says it's tchilas ha'alan, when the leaves first come out. So not even when there's pears formed. Leaves maybe means even blossoming or even earlier, you're not allowed to cut them down. That's what the Shammai holds. It's different from tree to tree as to when we say that the peiros have already started to grow. I'm breaking my teeth over it. When the peiros, when the boxer starts to look already like a chain, so they have to develop to a certain point. Like gefanim and grapes, misha yagriu. What does yagriu mean? Rashi says misha gidlu ha'anovim ksas. When there's some development. Now we don't know if that's smodar that we quoted earlier, where there's a machlokes Rabbi Yosy and Rabbanon by smodar, if it's considered a peri. Rabbi Yosy considered it a peri. Rabbanon didn't. Yagriu, I don't know what this is. But it's at some stage of development. Is it smadar? Is it more developed than smadar? Is it less developed than smadar? I don't know. We'll see soon. It's a stage of development of the grape that we refer to as gerua. We're soon going to say that this means when the grapes are the size of a white bean. At what point do we say olives are considered fruit? In Rashi, mishayagdal hanetz aliya. There's some type of sheath that grows around them. Right? It's like what we discussed by dates also. When they're premature, they have a certain type of shell around them. The shar kolilamis and all other trees is mishi yotziu. Now the Rishonim not over here tell us that this yotziu doesn't mean the same Yotziu as Beis Shammai meant earlier, just merely leaves. Yotziu means when the fruit starts to develop. V'amar Abasi, now this is important. V'amar Abasi, hu boiser, hu girua. So that's a very important piece of information, because we know that the stage of boiser is more developed than the shear of smadar. So now we already know that there's a shita that's not the shita of a Yosy, because a Yosy holds when it's smadar, it's already considered a peri. Yet this brisa says Mashiach Griu, which is boiser. So we know for sure from this line that this brisa here is not consistent with the Yosy. So it must be consistent with the Rabbanon. So Vamar Abasi, who boiser, who girua, who pull 11, they're all the same. Pull 11 solkedaitach. We're not speaking about beans, we're talking about grapes. Pull 11. So boiser and girua is a grape that's already developed to the point where it's the size of a small bean. So let's think. Good morning. Who says that a grape is only considered developed into a fruit when it's at the stage of boiser, not at smadar? That's the Rabbanon, like we pointed out earlier. The Katani and this brisa, which clearly is the Rabbanon, and we know it's the Rabbanon because of the shear of boiser. The Katani shar kol hilanis, all other trees, and date trees would be included in shar kol hilanis because they weren't itemized in this list, so it falls under the category of shar kol hilanis. As soon as the fruit develops. So if that's the case, it's going to be shver and Rabbi Loi, because you see, even the Rabbanon who hold that a grape is not considered a fruit at smadar, he'll agree that a date, as soon as it develops, it's already considered a fruit, even though it's very small. If that's the case, how could Rabbi Loi have cut down that date tree when there were fruits on it? So tomorrow, Rabbi Loi did the nischen he cuts. What type of date tree did he cut? He cut a male date tree. We learned before that date trees actually have a gender. And a male date tree, Rashi says, never ever produces good pears, and they never ripen on the tree itself. They ripen if you take them after you take them off the tree and you basket them, you put them in the baskets. But since they don't have good pears, Rabbi Loi held he was allowed to cut it because he wasn't mafsid pears because they really weren't good pears. Tanar Rabbanan, oichlin ba'anovim ad sheyichlu deloyos shaloichlin. How long are you allowed to continue eating in the Shemitah year and after from the grapes that grew on the vines? In other words, at what point do we say there's not enough left for the chayis and the sada, and therefore, like religious to say, you're no longer allowed to use it in your home? So the Brisa says, the loyos, Rashi tells us, are vines that have to be supported by sticks, and oichel was actually the name of a place. So until this place where there tended to be a lot of grapes, when there's no grapes there left at that point, then we say that you're no longer allowed to eat grapes from the Shemitah. However, if there are places that have grapes that are lasting even longer, that are on the tree longer, then you could. So when we say yichlud lo shaloichel, because that's typical. But if in fact you find somewhere where the grapes are on the tree longer, well, then it's not considered kol l'chayim in a besada. Now, what about the olives? Until the last of the olives are used up in the area called Takua, which was also an area where there were a lot of grapes there. Not to be confused with the Tokay region in Hungary. Rabbi Lezer says, I'm not sure what the pronunciation of this word is. If anybody has an art scroll, I'd appreciate the help. So Gushkov was also a place where they had a lot of olives. So in Rashi, this happened to have been in the Chelik of Osher. So until there's no cholav, so until there's no olives left there, you could still enjoy the olives on the trees in your home in Shemitah. Kidei sheyehei ani yotzei ve'enei moitzi loy benufai v'loy be'ikroi roiva. At what point do we say there's no olives left on the tree? It means if from a single tree, an ani cannot find olives that are either on the tree or on the floor around the tree, that would add up to a roiva. A roiva, I believe, is the size of 6 eggs. It's a roiva hakav, which is a loy. So it's the size of 6 eggs. If you can't find that amount of olives somewhere on the tree or around the tree, then we say it's depleted. And the Mesivta brings down from Mefarshim that means per tree. If he has to go through a whole orchard to find a roiva, that wouldn't be considered that there's enough olives left on the tree. It has to be per tree. He has to have at least one tree that he can gather at least a roiva from, and then you're allowed to use what you have gathered in your home. Otherwise, you can't use it. Oichlin begroigros. What about groigros, which are dried figs? Ad sheyichlu pagi beisini. Until all the figs get used up in Beisine. Again, it was a place where a lot of figs grew, I guess. Rabbi Yehuda.
There's another region like 10 miles away from Beis Eriko. And there's enough on their trees, but there's not in the Beisine, so you can't you have to stop using it.
Okay, gewalt. Shkoyach. So Rabbi Yehuda. The loy huskru pagi beisini aliya meiser. When the Bryce had mentioned pagi beisini, it wasn't talking about when they're used up, lagabi limiting the beer shvius. Rather, it's just talking about meiser, and it's saying that they're peris liya meiser. That none pagi beisini, the figs of beisini, the ahini the tuvina, and the dates of a city called Tuvina. Chayovin b'meiser. You're chayiv to take meiser of them. In other words, they have the status of Paris, and since they have the status of Paris, you're mechuyev to separate meiser from them. Why would I think otherwise? Zokt Rashi, oisam pagin, oisam tamarim, lolim ketanim. They always grow very small. They don't mature into normal size pears. So we need a brayso to tell us that they're still considered pears and they're chayiv in meiser. Ad sheyichla ha'achroin shabitzayar. Until the last of the figs of tzoyar, like we learned earlier, get used up. Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, oichlin al shalbein akipin, ben oichlin al shalbein ashitin. Again, which we learned earlier, means that Shimon ben Gamliel is saying is we don't consider figs that are stuck in the spikes of the tree as remaining. The figs that you have to find on the tree have to be on the upper area where the leaves are, where it's soft, where animals can get to. I'm sorry? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is a chumrah, because even if there's figs left where the spikes are, but there's no figs left on the leaves, you have to stop using the figs that you have in your house, because that's not called available to chayyos in the Sunday.
They obviously come first.
The chayyos come first, that's what Torah says.
Which ones get depleted first?
The ones on the spikes generally don't get depleted at all because the animals can't access them because there's spikes around them. Frank Gemara Ramini, we have a kasha. You've given me a whole list of when the deadline is, when you can no longer use shvius. We have a whole different set of deadlines. It says Oichlin ba'novim ada Pesach. Anovim is till Pesach of the following year. B'zeisim ada atzeres. B'groigros ada Chanukah. And b'tmorim ada Purim. And V'amar Bibi Rabbi Yechon Tarti B'Shrais Machlef, which means b'groigros till Purim and b'tmorim until Chanukah. So the problem is we have two brises. One gives us shiurim based on when they're depleted in certain places, and the other one gives us hard cutoff dates based on Yom Tovim. Zok Gemara, it's not a steer. Idi v'idi chad shiurim. Really, they're both the same thing. Normally, when do the grapes get depleted? They get depleted Pesach time, and so on and so forth. Or you can say another terrace. Hakatani behedya. Even the brisa that gave us specific cities when they're used up there, they're no longer you can no longer eat them bebayis. It says there's a clause there in the brisa that says if you happen to find things that go later, then of course you could. So you see, it's not a hard date. So the Mesivta brings down from somebody an interesting thought to say a nafkamina between these two shittas. If you hold Idi v'Idi Chachi Urahu, then what we're saying is they're both the same shear. But of course, if you end up finding Paris later, that means we would extend it past Pesach or past Sukkot, past all the Yom Tovim, because we're saying generally the Paris get used up on Pesach, but we also know that if things drag out longer and the Paris are available longer, Avada, you'd be able to enjoy the Paris in your home longer. In the second shot, where the Brisa says that they're not the same shear, but the Brisa says it's not a stira because of Yesh Mucharis Min Eichen Aleim, so that would indicate that the first Brisa that talks about when it gets depleted in certain places, yes, if it gets depleted in this place, but there's other places where it's not depleted or it doesn't get depleted normally, in the normal time, it gets depleted later, you can still consider that available on the Sadi, you can eat the bias. But the Brisa that says Pesach and Atzeres, that might be a hard cutoff, even if you find them out there. So it could be that would be the nafkamina between the two terutzim of the Gemara. Zok the Gemara vayta Tanya. Simin laharim. This. How do you know if this is considered a mountain? Milan. If there are trees that are called milan, and Rashi tells us that milan are a fotzim. It's a type of fruit that they used to make dye out of. I'm not sure what it is. It's probably something that berry make dye out of. If you have an art scroll, it'll probably tell you what milan means. But I
They're galls. Galls. They're a growth. They're not the actual fruit of the tree. They grow. They're like a tumor that grows on oak trees.
Aha. Okay. So is this an oak tree? Is that what we're talking about?
It looks like it.
Okay. So that's a siman of Horem. Rashi tells us that good fruit didn't grow in the mountains because it was very windy. Only these types of trees would flourish there. And we're going to soon see why that's relevant. But the Ben Ish Chai says, the Ben Yehoyada says that Siman Lahara Milim, why do things not grow there? Because there's very strong winds there that destroy things. What causes destruction? Milim. When people don't speak properly, when people say things that are offensive to other people, that creates the winds of turbulence. Geula will come when we get a handle over our milim, when we can control our words. Because you mean the Malshinim are using the milim the wrong way.
Everyone criticizes everybody else. The master criticizes the anti-master.
I hear. Right, so maybe we have to learn not to. We have to learn just to accept each other. Okay? Simin la'amokim. How do you know if something's an emek, if something's considered a valley? The column. The trees that grow well there are day trees, but other trees don't grow well in the valleys. Again, the Ben Ish Chai says, the Ben Yehoyada says, Simin la'amokim the column. How do you know if someone's be'emes and anav when his payers are up high? Someone who has schar because he does mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim, his head is way up in Shemayim. So the siman of an anav is that his head is in Shemayim. He tracht von Yenevelt, tracht von Shemayim. He doesn't think about Gashmias. That's a sign of an anav as well. So siman la'amokim the column. Tall trees with their pairs that are all the way to the top, they grow in low areas. Siman la'nachalim. Siman, I guess a nachal is like a riverbed. Is kanim if reeds grow there, and siman l'shvelo, which would be the prairies, which would be flatlands. Shikma would be the shikma tree that grows some type of small figs as well, but it's not really. Rashi's eino isa pri. It's not a fruit tree. There are those who learn make small figs. Now, why is all this relevant? We're going to see in a moment. Even I don't know the Klora Raya that in the prairies is where the shikma tree grows. There was such wealth. Nobody's telling us in Malachim that there was such wealth in the times of Shlomo that the silver he would just put them on the street like stones. There are those who learned there were such heavy pieces of silver, he didn't have to worry that people would steal it. Or it could be there was such abundance that he made the public benches and the manhole covers out of gold and silver because it was so plentiful. and cedar wood, which was also extremely valuable, Nosan Kishakam Masher B'Shvela, he treated it like inexpensive wood, which would be the wood of a shikma tree. He just put it as plentiful as the shikma is in the prairies. That's how much Erez wood he put out there.
Which is when you think of it, the Torah, when you think of the Yidden Olaf and the Devil Yishon Ta'avonim, once gold and silver becomes so common, it's not a symbol of wealth anymore, and it's not even practical for wealth anymore. Meaning it's currency, money is so plentiful, nobody wants it.
It's called inflation. But Weissreich people still wanted it. I guess it was plentiful enough that they were able to use it a lot.
The people were so well that people didn't have to go to work because they had so much food or they had some clothing.
No. All you have all used to get some. Just because someone's rich, it doesn't mean he's not going to try to acquire more.
True, but nobody will acquire more if everybody has it. If everybody has, nobody wants it. If nobody wants it, then it's not worth anything.
I hear.
That's what the Gemara is saying. So it's a bit of a headache.
I hear. There's other people who learned Vesarazim Nasan Kishkama means people built homes out of Erez, which was also a sign of opulence. But I'll call upon him, Leroy, that's how much it was. I'll call upon you see that shikma grows in the prairies, in flat land. So Zok to Gemara Vayter. Let's go back and analyze this price. Simin lahar milin, simin la'mokim kolim. Wasamir anafkamina. That's more anafkamina would be kurim. The nafkamina would be if you could bring bikurim from those places. It's non we learned. Ein mevin bikurim el meshivas haminim. You only bring bikurim from the shivas haminim. V'loy midakolim shibaharim. You don't bring them from the kolim that grow on the mountains. And Rashi tells us because they don't grow nicely. The Eina Meshubachim, El Dekolim Shalom Mokim, the only place you take dates from, to bring Bikurim from, are dates that grow in the valleys. Veloimi Perish Mokim, and also not from any other pairs, other than dates, any other pairs that grow in valleys you don't bring Bikurim from. And Rashi tells us since it's a very low, the water drains down to it, and it's always moist there, and it's going to cause the payers to rot. So therefore, good payers don't grow Ba'mokim. Okay, similar in the Cholim Kolim. The next line of the Brisa was, how do you know if it's like a riverbed, if reeds grow there? Nafkamina Nachalesan. We know Lo Yaleinu, if someone dies in between two cities and we don't know who killed him, so there's the process of Egla Rufa. Where do we have to do the process of Egla Rufa? It's done by Nachalesan. How do you know if you're there? If you have condom, if there's reeds there, then you know it qualifies. Similar Shafela Shikma. If these shikma trees grow, it's a sign of the prairies. Nafkamina lemekach memker. The nafkamina is if a guy tells you, I'm going to sell you an acre of shvela land for $100,000. If it has shikma trees in it, then you know it's shvela land. If not, then you could say you ripped me off and we got to back out of the deal. In fact, now that you came up with this nafkamina lemekach memker, kulanami lemekach memker. So then all of the identification of these four areas could also have been identifications for business purposes.
Every time the Lord would tell us what a nacha is, because maybe we need to know what a nacha is when the nacha is not around in the dry weather, right?
Right.
But what is, or a hill is a little bit hard, when you're standing under 50 feet high and low. But why does the law have to tell us what a prairie is?
I guess in order to have the legal status of a prairie, it has to have those trees there. So if you have flat land, but it doesn't have those trees, it wouldn't be considered legally shvela. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Vayter. Mokum shenohagu limkar behemedaka l'machrim moichrim. Now the halacha is, which doesn't apply nowadays, you're not allowed to sell a behema gasa to goyim. The reason why you're not allowed to sell a behema gasa to goyim, there are several reasons. One of the reasons is because we're afraid that you'll lend it out and a person is mitzvah al shvisas behemtoi, or you're going to show, when you sell it to him, and you're going to want to demonstrate, you might talk, you might say a word, and the animal will walk with packages loaded on it, and you'll be over mechamer. So if you come to a deraisa, and because of that, you're not allowed to sell a behema gasa. Mechamer is making your animal do a malacha, carry a package. No, you're not allowed to sell it ever because we're afraid that you might sell him a behema gasa, and before Shabbos you might talk, and it'll make the animal move. So we're worried that never to sell it because on Shabbos you might make it move by mistake with packages on it. There's also other reasons why the Gemara brings down you don't sell animals to a goy that are much more personal in nature. The goy can get very, very intimate with his animals, and you don't want to be machshel also from the either. So I'll call upon them. Behema gases you're not allowed to. The place will say nowadays it's not so relevant anymore because A is animals don't respond so much to a person's voice, and B is in those days Jews were in much more self-contained communities, so they didn't have to do business with the goyim. Nowadays it would be very difficult to survive without relying on the mekach memkar with goyim. So anyway, makom shenahagu limkar behema daka lenochrim moichin. Makom shaloi nahagu limkar. Places where the minhag was not to sell a behema daka, ain't moichin, you don't sell. And Rashi the shaila is if you're geyser behema daka otu behema gasa. So zok to Gemara. But in all places, a moichin lahem behema gasa, you cannot sell them a behema gasa. A golem are calves. Usiyachin, a siyach is a young ram. Is that what a siyach is? Or a young donkey? I think it's a young donkey. Shleimin complete. Ushvurin even if they're injured. Rashi tells us, ein moichin lahem behema gasa. The gozer bear abundance of gzeira. Mishum shelo, you might lend it out on Shabbos. Mishum schish, you might rent it out. Umishim nisyoini, or because the guy might test it on Shabbos when he's thinking of buying it from Mesechus Avodah Zarah. The Yisrael mitzvah al shvisa b'hem b'Shabbos, and the Yisrael's mitzvah agel misachim, even small ones. V'avagav the lab b'nei malacha ninu, even though they're not b'nei malacha. Michlafi b'mechiras gedolim. We're afraid that if you sell small animals, the calves, you'll sell bulls. I'm sorry? Oh, that's a beautiful kasha. So they asked that kasha, and they say, when is there gzeira? That's only if they first made a gzeira and then they added another gzeira to it. But if their original gzeira incorporated it, it's not a problem with gzeira. We had it several times in Masechah Shabbos, so it's actually used directly to explain this Indian as well. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvur. Rabbi Yehuda holds a shvur is not a problem, and then b'seir matir b'sus. But b'seir is matir b'sus because a sus generally doesn't carry packages; it carries people. And a chai noises atzmoi. So the whole iser at worst would only be a derabon anyway, because it's only a derabon that you're not allowed to ride a horse on Shabbos. Therefore, we're not going to be goyzer that you can't sell. Mokum shenehegu lechel tzli b'ledab psachim. In places where the minhag was to eat roasted meat, and we're not talking about carbon Pesach, we're talking about other meat that's roasted on Pesach. But places where the minhag is not to eat roasted meat, you don't eat. Let's see the Gemara. It's also for a person to say, I'm going to be using this meat for Pesach, not the carbon Pesach, even if you're just mentioning, I bought this meat for Pesach. You know why? It looks like you're being makdish your behema and you're oichel kachur b'chutz. Rashi tells us, even if it's shechted, and it looks like kachur b'chutz. Tosfos asks, what do you mean it looks like kachur b'chutz? You can't be makdish something when it's meat. You can only be makdish an animal that's alive. The Tosfos learns it looks like you would have been makdish it before. In other words, if someone sees you saying this meat is for Pesach, they'll think that you were makdish the animal before Pesach. Amar Papa. Before Shechted, that's right. Amar Papa. We are talking before Pesach. Amar Papa, Davka Basar. This problem is only Basar. Avachiti loy. I'm allowed to say this wheat is for Pesach. Why? Because it means the mintal epischa. Don't think it. A person won't understand it as I'm being makdish this wheat to buy a carbon Pesach with. No one's going to think that, and therefore I'm eating kachim. Rather, people are going to assume that it means I'm putting it away to be yoy to the mitzvah of matzah. Mintal epischa kama. You mean to watch. I'm watching it for Pesach. No, but don't say a person will not think, oh, you're planning to be makdish this money to buy a korban Pesach with it. Rather, you're just saying, I'm saving this wheat for Pesach. It shouldn't become chametz. You're not allowed to say this basar is for Pesach. Meisvei. Rabbi Yosy. Tudus ish Romi. Tudus from Rome. And Rashi tells us that Tudus was a Yisrael choshev. He was a very choshev, influential person. Hinniges b'nei Romi. He had angefeared that in Rome, lechel gediyim mikulasim. He made them eat gediyim mikulasim, which are very nicely roasted gediyim b'leilei Pesachim. Pesach by night. Sholchuloi, the Rabbanim sent him a message. If you weren't there, powerful to this, we would put you into Cherem. Because your Michael Yisrael kachim b'chutz. In fact, kachim shol kadaitach. It wasn't kachim. Ella ema. Let's say it's karev lahachal as Yisrael kachim b'chutz. It looks like kachim b'chutz because it looks, you're roasting it just like you're roasting the korban Pesach. Let's talk to Gemara. Mekulasin. We're going to soon see. He was a tough guy. You can't push him around. We're going to soon see what choshev means. The Gemara discusses that. That's precisely what the Gemara is going to know. Because talking about mekulasin, the only reason why they had a problem is because it was roasted just like the korban Pesach. But if it was stam meat, there wouldn't be a problem. So how could you, Rav, say that you're not allowed to say I'm putting this meat away for Pesach? There's not a problem unless the meat is specifically roasted like the korban Pesach. And this piece of meat, you can't do that anymore. Because mekulas means the whole carcass is roasted together with the legs on its side. Zok to Gemara, Amri mekulas loishna amar loishna loy amar. If you make a gdi mekulas, there's a problem with that, even if you didn't say this is a korban Pesach. She'ein mekulas, if it's a regular piece of meat that you want to roast, pirishin, if you said this is for Pesach, then you'll have a problem. Loy pirish loy. Zok to Gemara v'ayter. Rav Achim masnala la masnisa kirab shimon. Rabbi Acha learned that instead of this whole thing said over in Rabbi Yosy, because we in our Gemara says, Rabbi Yosy, Tudish Yisrael Mihinig. Rabbi Acha learned that this thing was said over by Rabbi Shimon. Matzkav lo Rabbi Sheshes. Bishlam alamanda tanila Rabbi Yosy nicha. If you learn that it was Rabbi Yosy who said over the story, that'll make sense. Elamanda matzak Rabbi Shimon, but if you say it's Rabbi Shimon who said this thing over, it's going to be a problem. Minicha, because Rabbi Shimon would be inconsistent with this. But now we learned, Rabbi Shimon Poiter, Shaloy Yisnadev, Kederech HaMisnadev. Rabbi Shimon has a shaila. In the case of someone who said, Harei Alai, Mincha Min HaSayrim. Now, there is no Mincha of Nedava that you bring from Sayrim. So what is the loch if someone says, Harei Alai, Mincha Min HaSayrim? So the Tanakama says, Mevi Min HaChitin. You know why? Because when you said, Harei Alai Mincha, you were Mechuyev already on Minchas Chitin. When you stuck in Min HaSayrim, it's a mistake. So we're toughest Lashon Rishon. Reb Shimon argues. And Reb Shimon says, when someone says something, you have to focus on everything that he said. The entire statement was Harei Alai Mincha Min HaSayrim. So that's what he wanted to do. Now that's impossible to do. So therefore he's potter from anything because his words won't be mechayev him with anything. So Zok Gemara, but now Reb Shimon Aimer, Potter Shalo Yisnadev Kederech HaMisnadev. Why am I potter? Because there's two factors involved. A, because we look at my whole expression, which said Min HaSayrim, and B is once I try to make a neder or a nedava that's not a proper nedava, the nedava is completely invalid. So there's two components to the Shimon's psak of why you're potter from the mincha. A, we look at your full language, and B is once we look at your full language, your language is not the normal way to make a nedava, and therefore it's disqualified. So Amalei. So what's the problem with that? The problem with that is over here, even if he said that this should be a korban Pesach, it wouldn't make a difference. So the Rashi says, "V'hai machal gedima kulas nami." When you're eating a gedima kulas, why should there be a problem with it at all? My karev l'kachim b'chutzika. Why is there a problem that it's karev l'kachim b'chutz? Haloi mechayim lo'ikara alav shem Pesach. We're not speaking about someone who took a live animal and made it into korban Pesach. Even if while it was roasting, he said, "Harei zeh korban Pesach," even then, according to Rabbi Shimon, there wouldn't be a problem. That's not the normal way. So according to Reb Shimon, why should there be a problem at all? So that's why the Gemara wants to suggest it doesn't make sense to say that this is going according to Reb Shimon. So Amalei Ravina, Rav Ashi, are you telling me that, okay, Reb Shimon, you agree it doesn't fit in, but Reb Yosy is better? Reb Yosy also agrees to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon b'shitas Reb Yosy Amar. Rabbi said that Reb Shimon has to come on to the shita of Reb Yosy. Reb Yossy's shita is that you look at his whole expression. And Reb Shimon holds, like Reb Yosy, that you look at his whole expression. The Amar af b'gemar devar of Adam nitpas. Reb Yosy said, Allah lagabi t'mura. If someone said, I raised the t'mura as'ayla, t'mura shlomim, Reb Yosy learns that you look at the whole expression. You don't just say, I raised a t'mura as'ayla, which is exactly what one of the pieces that Reb Shimon needed in order to say that this wouldn't be a problem. So my lav, with Reb Shimon Savala Reb Yosy, if Reb Shimon holds of Reb Yossy's shita that you also look and focus on the end of his statement after Gmar Dvarim Adam Nitfas, so maybe Reb Yosy Namer Savala Reb Shimon, maybe Reb Yosy also holds of Reb Shimon's second part that if you're not noidiv, the derech hamisnadvin, it's not a neder at all, and therefore Reb Yosy couldn't have quoted this issue with Reb Tudas either. Reb Shimon Savalak Reb Yosy, V'lo Reb Yosy Savalak Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon holds of Reb Yosy. He holds that you look at all of the things he said, and Reb Shimon has this extra component. Shaloi Nadav Kederech Hamisnadvin. Reb Yosy holds you look at the end of his words, but we don't disqualify his words if it's Loi Nadav Kederech Hamisnadvin, and therefore it makes sense that Reb Yosy said that Tudas did a wrong thing. So now the Gemara asks Chaim Tzvi Shaila, why did the Rabbanim not want to put Tudas in the Chayim? Tudas Ishraimi Gava Rabahava? Was he a Choshev Yid and a Talmud Chacham? They didn't want to put him into Chayim, like we learned yesterday about not putting a Talmud Chacham into Chayim, right? There was a Talmud Chacham who was walking, he traveled on the second day of Shavuos, and they only gave him Malchus, they didn't want to put him into Chayim. Is it as of that? Or was he a big tough guy and they were afraid to get beaten up? And the Mefarshim bring a raya from here that, we always get angry. How come the Rabbanim only come down on me? The rich guy in shul, if he schmoozed, the Rav would never tell him anything. So, Zok the Gemara, it's always gehalten la'alacha that a Rav sometimes shouldn't start out with a big tough guy. We always complain, how come the Rav doesn't stand up to him? And doesn't stand up to him. It's always gehalten la'alacha that the Rav shouldn't stand up to big tough guys.
They told them off.
That's right. But they didn't do it.
Said they're not
That's right. Tashima. So, the Rav should go over to a guy who's a big tough guy and says, if you wouldn't be a big tough guy, I would scream at you not to speak during davening. Right? Right?
Someone who is a big tough guy,
I hear.
think of repercussions of being a tough
I hear.
guy because in the English theory, because
I hear. Okay, let's go by Tashma. I do Darish Tudas. So we're going to prove that Tudas was an Er L'Chayid at Talmud Chacham. I do Darish Tudas Ishraimi, and that's the raya from the fact that he made another drasha. So you see, at your et learning, so you see he was the Adam Choshev, he wasn't a big tough guy. And what was the shaila? Ma ro chananya mishoel v'azara shematzur atzmon al kedusha sheshem lekibshaneish. Why did they jump into the kibshaneish? So Tosha says, what do you mean why? It was avodah zarah. So Tosha says, could be it wasn't real avodah zarah, and they could have ran away, but they wanted to make a kiddush shemayim and jump into the kibshaneish. Zok the Gemara, nosu kal v'chomer ba'atzmon. They made a kal v'chomer to themselves. Mitzvardim. Uma tzvardim she'ein mitzvah on Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem. A tzardei is not mitzvah on Kiddush Hashem. And they add, maybe Hashem told them to do this, but we're going to see in a second. Ksibu, it says, v'olu uvo b'veisecha, uv'tanurecha, in your ovens, uv'misharecha, in your dough. Emasai misharish mitzuyas eisol tamer. Why is the misharecha listed up right near the oven? Because when is dough in the oven? When the oven is baking. So therefore, it's a raya that the frogs jumped into the dough while they were baking in the oven, meaning they sacrificed their lives. And the Mefarshim tell us, even if there was a tzivui, first of all, lav dafka there was a tzivui, but because it doesn't say that the Rebroadcast was mitzvah them, it says they went there. But even if there was a tzivui, there was no tzivui any specific frog to go. He could have went to this frog and said, I want to go to the guy's bed. I'll hang out in the guy's bed on this pillow. Why should I go in the oven? You go on the oven. It's like Akiva Balta says, you could be a Yenemite. Yenem should go. I'll go in his bed. It would be a whole bunch of Yenemites, right? But they went in. So anu shematuvna kedusha Hashem malachas kama v'kama, we should be moishen nefesh. So you see,
Yosy,
Tudas was the chashav eat. He made a geshmak drasha. Of course, my favorite shot on this is why is it that the frogs who literally jumped into fire, they don't get any special schar, and the dogs shaloyecher kalav l'shoynoi, because of that we serve them beef la'ol ma'adol netzach l'zachem. So Rabbi Elevin spoke out of teretz is that there's a big difference between an instantaneous act of Mesiras Nefesh and constantly keeping your mouth shut over an extended period of time. That's much harder. I heard a Geshmaker shot. It's easier to jump into fire than to keep your mouth shut. Rabbi Yosy.
Yosy, this pasuk is in today's portion of Shnai Mikra.
Oh, it's mamish today's. So it's in the ravine. Okay, so it's mamish. Dover b'itay ma'atoy. Shkoyach. So Zok the Gemara, Rabbi Yosy bar Abed Amar, Matal Malai Lakish Savid Chamaya. He did an unbelievably noble thing. Much greater than lending an ani money is going into partnership with an ani. So with the Talmidei Chacham. So what he would do is he would invest in a partnership with Talmidei Chacham. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Matal Malai Lakish Talmidei Chachamim. If you invest with Talmidei Chachamim, Zoicha b'Yoshva b'Yeshiva Shamayla, you'll sit in the Yeshiva Shamayla. Remember, ki b'tzela chachma, b'tzela kesef. By getting into the tzela kesef, you also get into the tzela chachma. It doesn't say anywhere that your investment is going to do well. It doesn't say that anywhere. It just says that it'll get you into Olam Haba. I guess we should stop here. Have a wonderful day. Big atzlacha. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Shkoyach.
It's good.
Shkoyach.